They thought he would fall. When the great heathen army was shattered at Edington, when the Viking dream of conquering all of England was destroyed in a single day, when thousands of warriors lay dead on the battlefield and the survivors were fleeing in every direction, everyone believed that Erik Bjornsson would fall with them. They thought that a man who had risen so high, who had become a legend, who had been called the wisest commander in the entire army, would be broken by this catastrophic defeat. They thought he would give up. They thought he would flee. They thought he would disappear into the chaos like so many others. But they were wrong. Because on that day in May of 878, when the great heathen army was defeated and the age of Viking conquest in England came to an end, Erik Bjornsson did something that no one expected. He stood. While everyone else was falling, while everything else was collapsing, while the entire Viking force was disintegrating into chaos and despair, Erik Bjornsson was the only one still standing. And this is the story of what happened next. This is the story of how one man's refusal to fall changed the course of history. This is the story of how Erik Bjornsson became not just a warrior, but a symbol of hope for an entire people. Let me take you back to the moment after the Battle of Edington. The battle is over. Alfred has won. Guthrum has been forced to surrender. The great heathen army has been defeated. The Vikings have lost. For the first time in more than a decade, the Vikings have been decisively beaten. The shock of this defeat ripples through the entire Viking force. Warriors who have never known defeat are now facing the reality of loss. Commanders who have led victorious armies are now leading broken forces. The certainty that had defined the great heathen army for so long is shattered. Erik stands among the ruins of the battlefield. Around him, warriors are dying. Around him, men are weeping. Around him, the Viking army is falling apart. But Erik is still standing. He is wounded. He is exhausted. He is covered in blood. But he is still standing. And as he stands there, looking at the devastation around him, he understands something. He understands that this moment is crucial. He understands that what happens in the next few hours, in the next few days, will determine not just the fate of the great heathen army, but the fate of the entire Viking presence in England. Guthrum, the commander of the great heathen army, is forced to negotiate with Alfred. The terms are harsh. The Vikings must withdraw from Wessex. The Vikings must accept the Treaty of Wedmore. The Vikings must agree to the partition of England. The Vikings must accept that they will not conquer all of England. The Vikings must accept that they have failed. Guthrum accepts these terms because he has no choice. The great heathen army is broken. He cannot continue the fight. He must negotiate the best terms he can get. But while Guthrum is negotiating with Alfred, something else is happening. The Viking forces are beginning to fall apart. Warriors are deserting. Units are breaking up. Men are fleeing in different directions. Some are trying to return to Northumbria. Some are trying to reach their ships. Some are simply trying to survive. The cohesion that had held the great heathen army together for so many years is dissolving. The army that had seemed unstoppable just days before is now fragmenting. And it is in this moment of chaos, in this moment of despair, in this moment when everything is falling apart, that Erik Bjornsson does something remarkable. He does not flee. He does not try to save himself. He does not abandon his men. Instead, he begins to gather them. He begins to organize them. He begins to restore order to the chaos. He moves through the battlefield, finding warriors from his unit, finding warriors from other units, finding men who are lost and confused and frightened, and he gathers them. He brings them together. He organizes them into a coherent force. Other commanders see what Erik is doing. They see that he is holding his men together when everyone else is falling apart. They see that he is maintaining discipline when discipline is breaking down everywhere else. They see that he is offering hope when hope seems lost. And they begin to follow his example. They begin to gather their own men. They begin to organize their own forces. They begin to restore order to the chaos. But this is not about trying to continue the fight. This is not about trying to defeat Alfred. This is about something deeper. This is about maintaining the dignity of the Viking forces. This is about ensuring that the Vikings do not fall into complete chaos and disorder. This is about preserving something of the great heathen army even as it is being defeated. This is about showing that even in defeat, the Vikings can maintain their honor. Erik understands something that many of the other commanders do not understand. He understands that this defeat is not the end. He understands that the Vikings will not disappear from England. He understands that even though the great heathen army is being defeated, even though the dream of conquering all of England is ending, the Vikings will still have a presence in England. The Vikings will still control significant territories. The Vikings will still be a major force in English politics and warfare. And the way that the Vikings respond to this defeat, the way that they maintain their dignity and their organization, will determine what happens next. So Erik does something that seems strange to many of the warriors around him. He does not try to flee. He does not try to escape. He does not try to save himself. Instead, he stays with his men. He helps organize the retreat. He ensures that the wounded are cared for. He ensures that the supplies are gathered. He ensures that the men who are fleeing have some kind of order and organization to their flight. He becomes, in a very real sense, the backbone of the retreating Viking force. Days pass. The negotiations between Guthrum and Alfred are completed. The Treaty of Wedmore is signed. The great heathen army agrees to withdraw from Wessex. The great heathen army agrees to accept the partition of England. The great heathen army agrees to accept defeat. And the Vikings begin their retreat. They begin to move north, back toward the territories that they control, back toward Northumbria and the Midlands. And through all of this, Erik remains. He remains with his men. He remains organizing the retreat. He remains maintaining discipline. He remains offering hope and leadership when these things are desperately needed. He remains standing when everyone else is falling. But here is what makes Erik's actions even more remarkable. He is not doing this for glory. He is not doing this to become famous. He is not doing this to increase his own power or prestige. He is doing this because it is the right thing to do. He is doing this because his men need him. He is doing this because the Viking forces need someone to hold them together. He is doing this because he understands that even in defeat, there is honor in maintaining your dignity and your organization. Other warriors notice this. Other commanders notice this. They see that Erik is the one holding things together. They see that Erik is the one who is still standing when everyone else is falling. They see that Erik is the one who is offering leadership and hope. And they begin to gather around him. They begin to look to him for guidance. They begin to follow his example. One of the older commanders, a man who had fought alongside Erik for years, approaches him during the retreat. This commander is exhausted. He is defeated. He is broken by the loss at Edington. He looks at Erik with a kind of despair in his eyes. He says that everything they have fought for is lost. He says that the dream of Viking conquest in England is over. He says that they have failed. He says that there is nothing left to fight for. And Erik looks at this man, and he speaks. His voice is calm. His voice is clear. His voice carries the weight of someone who has thought deeply about what he is about to say. He says that the battle is lost, but the war is not over. He says that the great heathen army has been defeated, but the Vikings have not been destroyed. He says that they have been forced to accept terms, but they still control significant territories in England. He says that they still have power, they still have influence, they still have a future. He tells the commander that what matters now is not what has been lost, but what can be preserved. He tells him that the way they respond to this defeat will determine what happens next. He tells him that if they fall into chaos and disorder, if they abandon their men, if they lose their dignity, then they will truly be finished. But if they maintain their organization, if they maintain their discipline, if they maintain their honor, then they can rebuild. They can recover. They can continue to be a force in England. The older commander listens to Erik's words, and he is moved by them. He is inspired by them. He realizes that Erik is right. He realizes that even in defeat, there is a path forward. He realizes that the Vikings are not finished. He realizes that the age of Viking conquest may be ending, But the age of Viking presence in England is not ending. It is transforming. It is changing. But it is not ending. This conversation, this moment when Erik speaks to this older commander, becomes known throughout the retreating Viking forces. Other warriors hear about it. Other commanders hear about it. And they begin to understand what Erik understands. They begin to see that even though they have been defeated, even though they have lost the battle, they have not lost everything. They still have something to fight for. They still have something to preserve. They still have a future. As the retreat continues, Erik becomes more and more central to the organization of the Viking forces. He is not the official commander. Guthrum is still the commander. But in a very real sense, Erik has become the heart of the retreating army. He is the one who keeps men moving forward. He is the one who maintains discipline. He is the one who offers hope. He is the one who reminds warriors of their dignity and their honor. And as the days pass, as the Vikings move north, as they retreat from Wessex, something remarkable happens. The chaos begins to diminish. The despair begins to lift. The Vikings begin to understand that even though they have been defeated, they are not destroyed. They begin to understand that they still have a future. They begin to understand that the world has changed, but they can adapt to that change. They begin to understand that the age of unlimited conquest may be over, but the age of Viking presence in England is not over. The retreat reaches Northumbria. The Vikings begin to settle into their territories. They begin to reorganize. They begin to rebuild. And through all of this, Erik remains. He remains with his men. He remains offering leadership. He remains standing. Months pass. The immediate crisis of the defeat at Edington begins to fade. The Vikings begin to adjust to their new reality. They begin to understand that they will not conquer all of England. They begin to understand that they will have to share England with the Saxon kingdoms. They begin to understand that the future will be different from what they had imagined. But they also begin to understand that they still have a future. They still have power. They still have influence. And it is in this period of adjustment, in this period of rebuilding, that Erik's true importance becomes clear. He is not just a warrior. He is not just a commander. He is a symbol. He is a symbol of the fact that the Vikings can survive defeat. He is a symbol of the fact that the Vikings can maintain their dignity and their honor even when they are forced to accept terms they do not want to accept. He is a symbol of the fact that the Vikings can adapt to change and still remain Vikings. Here is what I find remarkable about this story, and what I think we need to understand about the Vikings and about the end of their dominance in England. The Vikings are often portrayed as people who could not adapt, who could not change, who were destroyed by the rise of stronger kingdoms. But the truth is far more complex. The Vikings did adapt, they did change, they did survive. And the way they survived was through men like Erik Bjornsson, men who understood that defeat is not the same as destruction, men who understood that the future could be different from the past, men who understood that honor and dignity could be maintained even in the face of defeat. Erik in this story represents something deeper than just individual leadership. He represents the resilience of the Viking culture. He represents the ability of the Vikings to face adversity and not be destroyed by it. He represents the idea that true strength is not about never being defeated. True strength is about being defeated and still standing. True strength is about maintaining your dignity and your organization, even when everything else is falling apart. True strength is about offering hope and leadership when these things are desperately needed. The Treaty of Wedmore, signed in 878, created what became known as the Danelaw. This was a vast territory in northern and eastern England where Viking law and culture would flourish for generations. This was not the complete conquest that the Vikings had dreamed of, but it was a significant achievement. It was a recognition of Viking power and Viking presence. It was a foundation upon which the Vikings could build a future in England, and this future was built in no small part by men like Erik Bjornsson, men who understood that defeat is not the end. Men who understood that the future could be different from the past. Men who understood that honor and dignity could be maintained even in the face of adversity. Men who understood that the most important thing is not to never fall, but to stand again after you have fallen. After the retreat from Wessex, after the Treaty of Wedmore was signed, Erik's reputation continued to grow. He became known not just as a great warrior, but as a great leader. He became known not just as someone who could fight, but as someone who could inspire others to continue fighting even when the odds seemed impossible. He became known as the man who was the only one still standing when everything else had fallen. But here is something important to understand about Erik's story. His standing was not about arrogance. His standing was not about pride. His standing was not about a refusal to accept reality. His standing was about something deeper. His standing was about an understanding that even in defeat there is dignity. His standing was about an understanding that even when the world changes, you can still maintain your values and your honor. His standing was about an understanding that the most important thing is not to win every battle, but to maintain your integrity and your dignity, no matter what happens. This is the lesson that the sagas teach us about the Vikings. This is the lesson that Erik Bjornsson's story teaches us. The Vikings were not invincible. They could be defeated. They could be forced to accept terms they did not want to accept. They could be forced to adapt to a world that was changing around them. But they could do all of this and still remain Vikings. They could do all of this and still maintain their dignity and their honor. They could do all of this and still have a future. The Danelaw that was created by the Treaty of Wedmore became a crucial part of English history. It was a region where Viking law and culture flourished. It was a region where Viking traditions were maintained and developed. It was a region where the legacy of men like Erik Bjornsson lived on. And this legacy shaped the future of England in profound ways. It shaped the laws that would govern England. It shaped the culture that would develop in England. It shaped the very identity of what it meant to be English. And all of this can be traced back, in part, to the moment when Erik Bjornsson refused to fall. To the moment when he stood firm while everything else was collapsing. To the moment when he offered hope and leadership when these things were desperately needed. To the moment when he understood that defeat is not the same as destruction, and that the future could still be built even on the foundation of a lost battle. This is the saga of Erik Bjornsson, the man who was the only one still standing. This is the story of a young man who understood that true strength is not about never being defeated, but about standing again after you have fallen. This is the story of someone who understood that honor and dignity can be maintained even in the face of adversity. This is the story of a warrior who became a symbol of hope and resilience for an entire people. The Battle of Edington in 878 was a turning point in English history. It was the moment when Alfred defeated the great heathen army. It was the moment when the dream of complete Viking conquest in England came to an end. It was the moment when the Vikings were forced to accept that they would not rule all of England. But it was also the moment when the Vikings adapted. It was the moment when they began to build a new future. It was the moment when men like Erik Bjornsson stood firm and refused to let their people be destroyed by defeat. And because of this, because of the way the Vikings responded to their defeat, because of the way men like Erik Bjornsson maintained their dignity and their organization, the Vikings did not disappear from England. They remained. They adapted. They built a new kind of presence in England. They created the Danelaw. They shaped the future of English civilization. And they did all of this because there were men who, when everything else was falling, were still standing. They thought he would fall. But Erik Bjornsson was the only one still standing. And because he was standing, because he refused to give up, because he maintained his dignity and his honor, the Vikings survived. They adapted. They built a future. And that future shaped the course of English history for generations to come.